As a business-to-business marketer, your needs are unique. B2B buying cycles are long, and your customers face incredibly complex decisions. Isn't it time you had a marketing platform built specifically for you? LinkedIn ads empower marketers with solutions for you and your customers. LinkedIn ads allow you to build the right relationships, drive results, and reach your customers in a respectful environment. On LinkedIn, you'll have direct access to and build relationships with decision makers. Of the 875 million users on the network, 180 million are senior-level executives, 10 million are C-level executives. You will also be able to drive results with targeting and measurement tools built specifically for B2B. And they work. Audiences exposed to brand messages on LinkedIn are 6 times more likely to convert. LinkedIn ads also ranked number 1 for security, community, and ad experience as part of Business Insider's Digital Trust Study. Here at Sway Group, LinkedIn is a pivotal part of our day-to-day and is just absolutely vital for building relationships with clients and with our employees. Make B2B marketing everything it can be and get a $100 credit on your next campaign. Go to linkedin.com/MPN to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/MPN. Terms and conditions apply.
Hey, it's Jason with the Marketing Podcast Network. You have less than 1 month left to get special early bird pricing for the Creator Economy Expo 2023. This event, folks, is for content creators and entrepreneurs interested in building and growing their content-first businesses. Do not miss this show. Join over 500 bloggers, podcasters, authors, newsletter writers, speakers, consultants, and freelancers at the learning and networking event for content creators. Plan to attend May 1st through the 3rd in Cleveland, Ohio. Register now to secure early bird pricing before it disappears March 31st. Early bird pricing ends March 31st. As a special offer, you can get $100 off just for listening to MPN shows like this one. Go to cex.events to register. Use the coupon code MPN100. The address, the URL, cex.events. That's the whole thing. Type that into your browser. cex.events. The code you use, MPN100. The Creator Economy Expo, Cleveland, May 1st through the 3rd. See you there.
Welcome to The Art of Sway. This is a podcast that brings you inside the world of marketing through the lens of influence. I'm your host, Danielle Wiley. Each week, through candid conversations with industry insiders, we will uncover how influencer marketing is making an impact across all consumer buying habits and is changing the way we talk to each other. Let's dive in. Jason Falls is one of the leading thinkers in the digital marketing space with a particular focus on influence and community commerce marketing. He serves as EVP of Marketing for Scipio.ai, the community commerce marketing platform. Falls hosts the widely downloaded Winfluence podcast, is the author of 3 books, executive producer of the Marketing Podcast Network, and loves sports, bourbon, and his family. Not in that order. I always love talking to the OGs in the influencer space, and Jason Falls is one of the OGs of the OGs. We covered a ton of interesting topics in this episode, including a very interesting conversation on the term influence marketing versus influencer marketing, and how at his new gig at Scipio.ai, he is now championing influence from the inside out. Enjoy. Well, hi, and welcome on.
Thank you, Danielle. It's great to talk to you again. Great to be here.
I think you win the award for best response emails to all the requests we send. Well, booking.
Yeah, I get it. I know how to do this. Let's go. Yeah.
Well, I'm looking forward to having this come. I mean, I always enjoy talking to you. Just really looking forward to this. I wanted to kind of start by setting the stage because I don't even know if I know the whole story. So for those in the marketing world, you are kind of known as an influencer marketing expert and are host of the podcast Winfluence, and we run in a lot of the same circles and probably have a silly number of connections in common on LinkedIn. But I don't know that I know how, like, your origin story and how you got there. So I thought it would be interesting to interesting to me at least, to start with that.
Okay. Yeah, sure. So I'm a PR guy by trade, and I actually, the whole marketing talking head agency world that we live in is actually my second career. I spent 15 years as a PR guy in college athletics. I traveled around and watched ball games for a living and ran press conferences and press rows and all that good stuff. And so when my son was born, he's a senior in high school now, so 17 years ago.
Yeah, mine too.
I decided I didn't want to travel as much and wanted to get, out of college athletics, and landed at an advertising agency in 2005. But it happened to be I was in a really unique position, because I was at Doe Anderson, which is an agency in Louisville, Kentucky, and they've been the agency of record for Maker's Mark bourbon for about 50 years. And the brand manager at Maker's Mark was watching the internet trends at the time. She was trying to understand what social media was. Blogs were starting to become relevant. Brands were starting to sniff at social media. They weren't really doing anything yet. But she came into my office one day, and I didn't really work on the Maker's Mark brand at the point, but she came into my office one day and said, I hear you know a lot about the internet, because I had been in the sports world. I'd worked in forums and message boards, and I'd had a silly blog on MySpace just for fun to try to figure out these channels. And, how can I figure out how to promote my student athletes and my coaches in unique ways? Because I was always at small schools that were overshadowed by big state universities and big conference schools. So I was always fighting for attention. And so she came in and said, I hear you know something about the internet. And I said, I play on it a lot. And she said, well, I need you to think about Maker's Mark through that lens. How can we start to use these emerging channels? And, fast forward about, 3 or 4 weeks, and I was director of social media, and I was developing strategies for Maker's Mark and then some of our other clients. And I kind of, because I was working in regulated industries a lot, I started getting invited to conferences, and one thing led to another. And I had a blog that was starting to grow because I was starting to get out there. And I just kind of landed in this spot of, I have thoughts about social media marketing that I think are pretty salient and true. And if people will listen to me, you could probably figure this out faster. Mm-hmm. And it just, I was in the right place at the right time and didn't screw it up, is what I like to tell people. And it kind of just led to me being a social media person, thought leader, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
And but I've always been a PR guy, so the influencer marketing piece came as I was working through the whole PR spam with bloggers issue back in the day, and trying to help PR people figure out how to use these new non-trained media members.
Right.
And to me, influencers are the same thing. It's a third party we're trying to work through to get to an audience, to influence that audience to take action. The fact that they're trained differently or they didn't go to journalism school doesn't matter. You still got to figure it out. And that's kind of where I've always sort of worked.
I think first of all, it's so interesting that those of us who've been doing it for a long time were kind of in the marketing world, but then also using social media on the side for our own personal reasons. And that became we had to teach ourselves. There were no master's degree in influencer marketing, which is wild to me that exists now. But I still remember one of my clients back in, it was before I had kids, so it must have been in the 90s, at a cabinetry company. And he was in charge of digital, and he used to be in charge of CAD designs. Like, he would actually design the cabinets, and they realized they needed someone to oversee the agency building their website, which was us, and to handle all of the internet stuff. And so they said, who here uses the internet? And he raised his hand, I swear, because he was watching porn. I swear that's what he was doing. Is the only reason he knew what was going on.
There you go.
And lo and behold, he was there for a long time running the digital department.
Yep. That's how it evolves. It's funny. Yeah. And I've actually had this really serious conversation. That story is not surprising to me, because especially if he had any technical skill at all and knew anything about coding, because if you think about it, the adult industry actually pioneered everything we're doing. Because they've always had
the first website I ever went to in college, my friend and I, we were like, what's this internet we keep hearing about? And we asked this guy that she knew, and he was like, well, go to playboy.com. So
yeah. I mean, it literally, I mean, they were
Because
the
they
first,
had a good one.
yeah, they were the first industry to figure out how to do paywalls. They were the first industry that figured out how to do streaming video. They were the first, I mean, you look at all the stuff that we consider sort of, day to day today, almost every bit of the technological advancements come because adult publishing houses and companies and whatnot had to find ways to get around the the nuances and the laws and the regulations to get in front of consumers in a way that they could do it privately in their own home.
Yeah.
And otherwise you would have to go somewhere and risk being seen or whatever. And so a lot of internet innovations come out of the adult industry. I don't think they get nearly enough credit for it for lots of reasons, but
right.
But they certainly deserve it.
And then one of the other things you said struck me. So back when I started doing influencer was pretty much when I was at Edelman. And we did look at, I mean, back then it was just bloggers, but we treated them at that time like journalists. Yeah. So we would send them product and expect them or hope that they would review it. And there was no money changing hands. And I think where that started to transition is that suddenly it was mostly moms, were overloaded with CPG products and frozen food, like all the just like buried under products at their house, and no one was paying them. A journalist is paid by a publication to review stuff without any payment from the brand. And I think that realization that, like, you know what, most of these folks actually aren't journalists. What we want them to be is a spokesperson.
Right.
And that was like where it really started to become what we see today.
Yeah, I think that coincided with that whole PR spam issue because as mom bloggers mostly, but certainly it bled over into other verticals as well, as they started to get more and more inundated with products and services, the issue came out. And this was 2006, 2007. The reason I know this is because this is sort of the first thing I did that made other people outside of Louisville, Kentucky pay attention to me. I actually called out Cision, which at the time was called Bacon's, Cision and the others out there, Burrell's and whatnot. I basically said, hey, you guys are contributing to this problem of PR spam because you're not asking these bloggers if they even want their contact information to be listed. You need to give them control over that because there are plenty out there who don't want PR pitches, who don't even know what PR people are. And it's our job in the PR world, in the digital marketing world, the social media world, to educate those bloggers to understand, hey, PR people aren't evil. They actually can help connect you with products and services and people for comment, quotes, and interviews and things like that. They can be really useful to you. But if you didn't go to journalism school, you didn't know that. And so you just thought, this is somebody else trying to sell me something on the internet. And so I called those companies out and said, you're contributing to this problem. And when you guys start to take steps to make your problem go away, it gets better. And the Heidi Sullivan was a young lady who worked at Cision at the time, and I think the research department. And she called me after I called them out because I was getting spam pitched too because I had a blog and whatnot. She said, "You're absolutely right. We need to fix what we're doing. Can we hop on a call?" And that led to me going to, I think it was PRSA International. Was the first national conference or international conference I went to. And I went basically with the Cision team to say, these guys are screwing things up and here's how we fix it. And so that was the first thing I ever did that got me any attention and made me realize, hey, squeaky wheel gets the grease. Let's just bitch about stuff and I'll be famous.
There was so much crazy back in those days. I still remember like the going on Quantcast and Alexa and trying to figure out how many page views people had. There were no platforms where you could go in and get someone's data and understand what kind of following they had. And it was kind of awkward to ask, which is crazy. If you're paying someone, you can ask what kind of following they have. But yeah, it was like the old days.
I actually, this is a funny story. I was speaking to a local group of PR people here, and this was 2006, 2007. And even my understanding and facilitation of all this has matured over the years, because I remember this young lady saying, I am a PR person. I reached out to a blogger and asked them if they would like information about this event or product or service. And their response was, how much are you going to pay me? How should I respond to them? And at the time, because I was a PR guy, I was trained as a PR guy, and I was still trying to figure this world out just like everybody else was. I said, well, I think you should respond to them if they go to hell, because you don't pay for stuff. You're a PR person. It's earned media. They don't understand that. But it didn't take me very long to realize that was not the way you should respond to that person. That it was more about, hey, let's reach out to them and say, okay, I understand your situation's different. I don't have a paid budget, but let's figure out how we can work together so that you do get, some sort of remuneration for what you're doing. Yeah. And you also get access to the information that I have. And so that's where very quickly, 2006, 2007, I started to turn around and say, there's a gap that we need to bridge just through education to make this whole thing work better. And I think a lot of us, I was a part of it. I wasn't the leader by any stretch of the imagination. A lot of us, including you, were doing that at the time, and things have certainly gotten better over the years.
I wanted to talk a little bit about what you're doing now, because you have a new gig and it's kind of a different type of influencer marketing. And I'm excited to hear more about it, because it's you've described it as inside out, which sounds exciting and fun, but why don't you explain a little bit about what you're doing?
Sure. So I'm the EVP for marketing at Scipio.ai, and it is a community commerce marketing platform, which is a kind of a bigger category than just influence marketing. Our foundational software application that the brand started with is called our CIM platform, CIM, Community Influence Marketing. And you'll notice that I use influence, not influencer, and I can clarify that in a minute, but it's basically an influence marketing software package. However, our perspective on the world is that instead of going outside of your brand and finding content creators and influencers that have a big following on social media and trying to partner with people who don't know who you are or may not know who you are, and then when you find those people, trying to get them familiar enough with your brand so that they can speak authentically about it, it's probably more efficient and potentially even more cost efficient to start from the inside out. And what I mean by that is, when you come to Scipio, we plug your brand into our ecosystem and we connect your social channels, and you tell us what hashtags you use and who you think your competitors are and what are some affinity brands that are non-competitive but share the same audience. And we basically map your community from a social perspective and identify the influential people that already know you, so that you don't have to go coach authenticity. You don't have to go buy someone who can fake being genuine. You're actually talking to people who are your customers, people who are your social media followers, people who might be your employees, other partners that are within your ecosystem. The more data you can bring to us to map from a social perspective, the bigger your community is, and the more apt we are to be able to find influencers that already exist, who are already, on the positive side of your brand. And it's amazing. Sometimes we'll do this community mapping for, a medium to small brand, and they'll think, well, I'll be lucky if there's a couple hundred people. And we'll map, 1 million people within their community. Wow. Largely because our definition of that is broad. Yeah. People who use the same hashtags, that's a part of your community. People who mention you online but aren't necessarily a customer or a follower, that's part of your community. So we're looking at this map from an internal perspective, and finding people who are already aware of and maybe even loyal or passionate about your brand, and working through those influential voices, which takes away the prerequisite of they have to have a lot of followers. It's not necessarily based on that. It's based on who creates content, who is influential over the people who follow that content, and are they mapped in your community and aware of who you are. If the person meets those three requirements, then they're worth talking to. Now, obviously, if someone has 50,000 followers versus 500, you're going to put them at the top of the list as opposed to, underneath the other person. But at the same time, it's less about followers and more about that authentic relationship We just think it's a more efficient way to get there, and seeing some good success with it.
That's really fascinating to me, especially from a B2B perspective, because certainly at Sway Group, we focus almost exclusively in the B2C world, where I think it is typically easier to find folks to talk about it. And there's not always as much loyalty. Like, you can wander through a supermarket and change brands all the time. It's not like SaaS software program where you're like in it for six figures for a year and not like going around and grabbing another option off the shelf. And so B2B influencer marketing has traditionally been so much more difficult and so much more expensive and so tricky, I think, because a lot of these influencers don't consider themselves as such and aren't always they're not signed up in networks to get sponsored content deals. And you really are kind of out there searching and scrounging and reaching out. And it's very, very difficult. So I love that concept for simplifying that entire branch of the marketing ecosphere.
And we also we look at it from both perspectives too. We've got, our SIM platform is sort of built for B2C, but we have a B2B SIM, and we also have what we call our community referral automation, which sounds like you're taking the humanity and the person, out of the equation, which is not necessarily the case. But essentially what we do with our CRA application is we look at, from a B2B perspective, or B2C, but it's mostly B2B, we look at we'll map your LinkedIn network and things like that, and look at that and say, okay, what brands or what people are you trying to get in front of? Are you trying to meet, connect with, network, pitch your product, whatever? And we will find the connections that get you to that person, and then have built a mechanism to be able to lightly automate the one-to-one connection so that you can kind of scale that activity.
Yeah.
It's something that we're seeing some interesting success with. We've been mostly B2C until recently, but have expanded out into B2B functionality as well. And it's kind of fun to see that.
I'm glad, because that's been tricky.
Yeah, it is.
Anything to make that easier. I am down. So talk to me about the influence marketing versus influencer marketing.
So this goes back to sort of the impetus for my my book, which is Winfluence. I don't even remember the subtitle now. Reframing influencer marketing to ignite your brand.
We'll put it in the notes.
So Winfluence the book's a couple years old, and when I was writing that book, I really wanted to fight the trend that I was seeing of people basically abusing influencers and turning the word influencer into a bad name, because these are people I've been working with for a couple of decades now, and I'm like, no, don't let the mainstream media turn tail and make them out to be a bad word. But what I also was seeing happening was a lot of brands were coming to the table saying, go find me influencers and pay them to hold my product and smile. And that's not how you should use them either, in my opinion. And so I got to thinking about it, and I thought, you know what? The problem is not with the word influencer. It's with the focal point of what brands are looking for. They're coming and focusing on the influencer and not on what they're trying to do, which is influence. And so my kind of hypothesis for my book was, we've got to get rid of the R. We've got to reframe how we think about influencer marketing and start thinking about it in terms of influence marketing. Because if you think about it in terms of the verb, the action, the goal, now all of a sudden those blinders come off and you're not fixated on an Instagrammer with 500,000 followers, because that person might be influential over their audience and might help you get where you're trying to go. But if you think about, okay, if my job is to influence, then that can imply that I'm working through the president of the local PTA group to influence local parents to shop at the parent-teacher store, right? Or support a political issue. I'm going to work through lobbyists and other, social and political leaders to influence that particular process. It kind of goes back to defining who and what we are as marketers, in that our job is to persuade, our job is to influence an audience to take action. And that can be through online social media channels, which is where we like to play. But again, if my client is the CEO or the owner of the local parent teacher store franchise, a 500,000 follower Instagram person isn't going to do me any good, because 0.1% of their audience is going to be within 10 miles of my store, right? So now I've got to find influence elsewhere. So if you take that R out of the word, it helps you actually think about what you're trying to do. And if you focus on the goal rather than the channel, now all of a sudden you have a much better strategic chance of being successful. So I like to say it's all about influence marketing. And Winfluence is the influence marketing podcast. And I love stopping and telling that story to people to say, just get rid of the R. Get rid of the R. It's just a semantic change. It's just one letter, but it changes the way you think about it if you really think about it.
We actually have another guest this season, and anyone who's a loyal listener will have already heard this, but we had a pretty interesting conversation about the terms influencer versus creator, which I'm sure you've been involved in some of those discussions. And she has the perspective that there's like a gender issue going on too. And that oftentimes, and I don't know that I've seen this, we kind of like sparred a little bit. I mean, I certainly have seen the backlash against the term influencer. She feels that a lot of that is rooted in sexism, and that oftentimes women are labeled as influencers, which is a whole other conversation that, I mean, if you have a comment, please comment. But I'm curious to know what you think just in general about the influencer versus creator debate.
Yeah. In terms of the gender bias there, I guess, I mean, I haven't thought deeply about it, obviously, but I guess I could see it. But I think it's not necessarily because the marketing world or brands are sexist one way or the other. I think it's because when the mainstream media and when we generally talk about influencers at a high level, not specifically with the talking head people like you and me who are talking about it all the time, but when a business owner is presented with information about influencers, it's typically through the mainstream media, maybe some trade publications, or maybe they're listening to a podcast. And in general, at that level, you're talking about beauty, fashion, style, fitness. And the majority, I believe, and I'm sure there's numbers out there to back this up somewhere, the vast majority of those creators are women. So I don't think it's a gender bias. I think it's just math.
Like demographics.
It's just demographics.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily disagree that that's the case. I think when people naturally think of influencers, they probably think of, a Kardashian-like person posing with lipstick, but it's because that's what has been reported as. When you hear, the mainstream media talking about influencers, it's typically the person who photoshops clouds out of their vacation pictures and photoshops the blemishes off their face and buys followers and things like that. And again, a lot of that activity is more style, fashion, beauty, and not outdoor and home and parenting and these other verticals that have been, so fruitful for many of our clients over the years, because there is a superficial layer, a small layer, thin layer of quote unquote influencers that are what I call the peace sign duck lips crowd, right? There's a thin layer of that out there, and those fall into that stereotype of, they're superficial. They're not real effective. There's not a whole lot of substance to what they do, but that's like maybe 5 or 10% of what's out there. The rest of the world of content creators / influencers have incredible connections with their audience. They're very influential over how their audience thinks about products and services and issues. They create fantastic content. They drive a lot of engagement. Those are the people that I work with on a regular basis, or at least I did when I was in the agency side of the aisle. And I think that's lost on a lot of people because when they see influencers in the news, it's always negative, it's always superficial, it's always dumb. Because the mainstream media is, they know we're all rubberneckers. We want to stop and look at the train wreck. Right. So that's what we do.
Well, I mean, when we started in this industry as a whole, the influencer world, which they weren't even called influencers, but it was pretty much all very authentic. It was people who just had something that they wanted to share and wanted to talk about, and there wasn't a way to monetize it. There weren't banner ads. There weren't sponsorship opportunities. Like it was just putting something out there because you had something to say and you wanted to connect with others. There was a big community element. And then I think as it became a money-making venture, people got into it just to make money. And as such, it became very highly curated and moved more towards aspirational. And I feel like I'm seeing it kind of dip back to the authentic, real space. And I don't know if you're seeing that too. I love it. I'm much more down with you showing me your messy house than everything looking perfect behind you, which is not my reality.
Yeah, I'm definitely seeing that as well. I think another thing that I want to throw in here, and I'm not sure if this is going down a rabbit hole or jumping through a tangent, but I think part of the problem too with the perception of influencers is as the mom bloggers evolved into, I guess, the Instagram set, and that evolved into what we know as influencers. The other thing, and this is where content creators / influencers haven't helped themselves. As they began to get brand deals, as they began to get offers and whatnot and put pricing together and, media kits and all that kind of stuff. And this is a topic that a lot of brands are, this is why they're allergic to influencers in a lot of ways, is because their egos got the best of them. And they were like, you know what? I have created this magical universe where I can tell all these people to go buy stuff, and they will. And therefore you have to pay me a lot of money. To this day, I mean, literally within the last 6 months, I reached out to someone who had like 45, 50,000 followers on Instagram, not other channels, just Instagram. And she wanted $7,500 for one content post. And I'm like, wow. Are you nuts? Like, what do you understand math at all? Yeah. And so I do think that influencers haven't, a lot of influencers, not all of them, but a lot of influencers have not done themselves any favors by overpricing what they do. And here's where I want to say something on behalf of the creators, but also say something on behalf of the brands. The misnomer in the industry for the last 5-10 years has been that you are paying for access to that creator's audience. That's only one of the three things you're paying for. And to be honest with you, on behalf of the brands that the creators are not going to like, access to your audience is not worth nearly as much as you think it is. Because
no, you can get someone with 3 followers and put that content in front of as many specific people as you like.
Exactly. You can take the content, repurpose it, etc. But also too, if you're only talking about in isolation access to your audience, then you need to measure it the way other marketing channels are measured, which is through CPMs, not based on how many followers you have, based on how many actual impressions you drive. When you do it that way, the CPM rate and what you should be paid for content, the only people who are going to make thousands of dollars per post are the ones who have, tens of millions of followers, because the math just doesn't work out. However, on behalf of the creators, that's not all you're being paid for. You're also being paid for your time and your talent, the content that you create. So if content creators out there want to do a better job of being held legitimate in the eyes of the brands and agencies they work with, price your stuff accordingly. This is the price for my time. This is the price for the talent, the content that I can produce for you, which, by the way, if you went to a freelancer or a production company and had it produced, it would cost this much, right? And then here's my reasonable CPM rate to get in front of my audience. If you offer that up to a brand, now they're like, holy, this creator knows what they're doing. And I don't necessarily need access to their audience, but I definitely want that content because I can put it over here to my audience or the people I'm targeting. So I think that's another thing that kind of has created tension in the industry that we can course correct if we help, creators, coach them to think a little bit differently about how they price what they do, and help the brands understand they're getting more than access to the audience too, because the brands need the education of, if you had to go pay your video production company to produce this, it'd be $25,000. And this person's asking for $4,500. So, weigh the options.
I think a big culprit too, just in the inflation of prices, is management. There are certainly some amazing managers out there who are worth their weight in gold and do a terrific job. There are also a lot of influencers who are using their friend next door, their husband, some manager they met randomly somewhere, and oftentimes we'll see someone who was great, easy to work with, made a fair amount of money, suddenly gets management, and the number just multiplies by way too much with no rationale behind it, other than that manager needs to try to make themselves seem like they're earning their paycheck. There's no real like meat behind that increase.
Yeah. What I would say to managers and creators out there is the day that the creator hires a manager does not multiply their audience by 30% or their efficiency by 30%. So it's better damn sure not multiply their price by 30%. So let's keep that in mind and be reasonable. Your goal is to get it to where you increase it by 30%.
Yeah.
But let's take them from here to here before you start asking for a lot more money.
Right. Okay, there's a ton more we could talk about, so I am sure this will not be your first visit to the podcast.
Good, I'd love to come back.
Yeah, but before I let you go, something that we ask all of our guests, at least in season 1 and season 2, is to share with us the TV commercial that has stuck with them the most from their childhood.
Oh my goodness. All right. This is going to be a different answer because I grew up in Eastern Kentucky. And in Eastern Kentucky, there's both radio and television. But a really good friend of mine, his stepdad owned the local car dealerships. And so he would run local TV ads. And it was Bruce Walters Ford, Lincoln Mercury Mazda was the dealership. And Jack Walters was the guy who runs it. Jack's, almost like a second father to me. I love the guy to death. But they had a sales guy who took on this persona called BM, Big Mouth Bass. And they would do the dumbest TV commercials ever. And they always ended with Big Mouth Bass sticking his foot in his mouth and saying something a little off color. And then Jack would go, Big Mouth. And they were the dumbest television commercials ever, but they kept the Ford dealership in the mindset of the consumers. They were really smart. I mean, the content was silly and dumb and stupid. And if you saw it and didn't know them, you'd kind of roll your eyes, but the repetition of them worked and made people really love that particular television spot. And then real quickly, very similarly on radio, we had our little group of Circle K, type convenience stores in Eastern Kentucky. Yeah. At one point was called Happy Mart. And they had the most annoying jingle ever. It was a bunch of kids singing, Happy Mart, food stores, we're taking care of you. Anything for your family, fill up with gas and food. I can sing the whole damn thing. But again, the underlying theme in both of those is repetition, reach and frequency worked.
Yeah.
I've still got that stuff drilled in my head. Happy Mart, I don't think exists anymore, but I can still sing that damn song.
I said to my husband the other day, some dumb, not a jingle, but a dumb 80s song came on the radio and I knew every single word. And I was like, can you imagine how smart I'd be if I could reallocate some of these brain cells that know every single
word. Oh yeah.
I think it was We Don't Have to Take Our Clothes Off, that song.
And
I know every single word to that song.
That's pretty good.
Not helping me with anything.
That's a pretty good one.
Well, thank you so much.
Yep. Thank you, Danielle. This has been great. I'd love to sit here and sing jingles with you all day.
Next time. So before you go, tell people where they can find you online.
I am Jason Falls everywhere. So real easy to find. JasonFalls.com. Scipio is at CipioCipio.ai. And reach out. Let's connect. I'd love to connect. And then, of course, if you love podcasts, which you obviously do, Winfluence, the Influence Marketing Podcast, is available wherever you get your podcasts.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. This has been terrific.
Awesome. Thank you, Danielle.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Please check back next Monday for a new episode featuring marketing conversations through the lens of influence. I am your host, Danielle Wiley, and this is The Art of Sway.
You may know you're listening to this show along the Marketing Podcast Network, but did you know there are other great shows on MPN to help your business? Christy Smallwood hosts a great podcast called Small Business Success Talk. Christy, tell us what these fine folks will get out of listening.
Well, you get the feeling of not being alone in building a small business. My guests have shared their success stories, their biggest challenges, their best practices, the passion for what they do, and what success really means for them. It's a mix of mindset, heart, and how-tos for the small business community to learn from each other.
Awesome. Where can people subscribe?
You can go to smallbusinesssuccesstalk.biz, or you can find the show at marketingpodcasts.net, or you can search for Small Business Success Talk wherever you get your podcasts.
You heard her. Go subscribe. This podcast is heard along the Marketing Podcast Network. For more great marketing podcasts, visit marketingpodcasts.net.